become the first victims of the imperial backlash. There was only one Roman legion stationed west of Africa, and that one legion was not controlled by the Gordians. Neighboring the province of Africa was the small imperial province of Numidia, which had been peeled off from Africa proper during the reign of Septimius Severus, and that was where the sole African legion was based. Numidia was controlled by a general who was either loyal to Maximinius, a personal enemy of the Gordians, or possibly both, and when he heard that Africa was in revolt, he immediately marched his legion to Carthage to put down the rabble. The Gordians knew all about that one legion in Numidia, and after being invested with the purple, Gordian the Younger set about raising a militia to help defend Carthage from attack. But a hastily raised militia of civilians was never going to be able to withstand a true legion composed of professional soldiers. The Africans had all the passion and dedication and heart in the world, but in the end, all of that bounced harmlessly off the shields of the Numidian legion. On April 12, the legion arrived in Carthage, and Gordian the Younger rode out at the head of his amateur army to meet them. The militia was broken apart easily, and Gordian himself was killed in the fighting. Inside the city, the elder Gordian heard what had happened to his son, and, resigned to his fate, chose to commit suicide rather than fall into the hands of the Maximinians. It was an ironic end for a man who had spent most of his life avoiding both war and politics. After the requisite week-and-a-half waiting period, the senators in Rome heard what had happened to their champions in Africa, and the color drained from their collective faces. Maybe they had been too quick to embrace the rebellion. In the heady rush to overthrow Maximinius, they had not stopped to fully think through the consequences of their action. They once again met in closed session, this time in the Temple of Concord, to discuss their situation. Nothing stood between Maximinius' Danube legions in Rome, except for some hastily raised militia commanded by, a few rich old senators? Wasn't this exactly the situation the Gordians had just faced, but on a much larger scale? And look how that had turned out for them. Death on the battlefield or suicide in the parlor seemed to be the only choices left to them now. So maybe we should send our apologies to Maximinius for the misunderstanding, offer our supplication, and beg forgiveness. But before they got too far down this road, a senator rose and reminded them of something that they all knew, but were afraid to say. Their fates were sealed. There would be no mercy from Maximinius. They were all dead men. Then, following one of those rousing, let us hang together, for surely we will hang separately speeches, the Senate agreed that the only honorable thing left to do was carry on with the rebellion. So they chose from their ranks of the 20 senators on the Executive Council 2 men who they agreed would be their new sovereigns: Marcus Claudius Pupienus Maximus and Decimus Caelius Calvinus Balbinus, the 4th and 5th emperors of the year of the 6 emperors. The 2 men were chosen due to their seniority, but also due to the particular skill set each brought to the office. Pupienus was a lifelong soldier who had made his fame and fortune serving in the legions. He had been appointed to 2 consulships, had once been prefect of Rome, and by the time of the rebellion, he was one of the most prominent men in the capital. Balbinus, on the other hand, had made his name as a man of letters. An orator and poet and lawyer of great renown, he had also served 2 consulships, and was admired by the other senators not just for his brilliance, but for the fact that his loyalty was to the Senate, not to the legions. It was determined that Pupienus would immediately make for Ravenna, where he would spearhead the military defense of Italy, while Balbinus would remain in Rome and take care of the daily administration of the capital. It was a neat division of labor that seemed the perfect answer to the empire's woes, but in reality, the partnership would not last the year. The Senate once again emerged from their sequestered session and announced the elevation of Pupienus and Balbinus to the citizens of Rome. Unlike their declaration ratifying the elevation of the Gordians, however, this latest announcement was not met by thunderous applause, but rather by boos, jeers, and the occasional flying object. The people had been enthusiastic about the ascension of the Gordians, because the Gordians had always been popular with the general population. People still raved about the games the elder Gordian had thrown. But now they were being offered what? A couple of old patrician senators who had never done a thing for them and were likely never to do a thing for them? The citizens of Rome felt that their interest had just been tossed overboard by the Senate, and so they made their displeasure known, loudly. They cried out that the only way this new senatorial regime would have any legitimacy at all was if they also elevated another Gordian to the purple. The only other Gordian available was a 13-year-old boy, who was the grandson of Gordian the Elder and the nephew of Gordian the Younger, which I suppose means we could call him Gordian the Youngest, but instead, we call him Gordian the Third. Afraid that unrest in Rome would undermine the war effort, the Senate saw little reason to deny the people's request, and young Gordian was named Caesar and junior colleague of Pupienus and Balbinus. He was the sixth of the 6 emperors of the year of the 6 emperors, and by the end of the year, he would be the only one left standing. Once the senatorial regime was accepted by the people, Pupienus headed to Ravenna to coordinate the defense of Italy. He had very little time to prepare, as it was assumed that the Danube legions would come pouring out of the Alps any day now, and had Maximianus broke camp the minute he heard about Gordian's initial revolt, he probably could have marched unchallenged all the way to Rome. But Maximianus did not immediately break camp. He was, after all, a soldier trained practically from birth to believe that the defense of the frontiers was his only purpose in life. So rather than immediately pack up the Danube legions and march on Italy, Maximianus spent a few crucial days arranging troop deployments so that he would not leave any space for opportunistic Germans to squeeze through. This moment of fidelity to the integrity of the empire was likely one of the key factors in Maximianus ultimately losing both the throne and his life, as it gave the Italian cities crucial time to prepare for his invasion. But once the border was arranged to his liking, Maximianus packed up the bulk of his men and marched on Italy. The few days' delay had done nothing to dampen his temper, and it was a furious, vengeance-driven emperor who led his troops through the Alps and into the Po Valley. He was going to cut a swath right through Italy on the way to Rome, and when he got to Rome, he was going to kill every senator he could find. The insolence of that pathetic body was just too much to bear. It was time to exterminate the whole disgusting lot of them. But Maximianus wouldn't make it to Rome. He wouldn't even make it out of the Po Valley. Not alive, anyway. Next time, Maximianus and his troops will indeed come pouring out of the Italy. They would be stopped short by the stern resistance of the citizens of Aquileia. Maximianus had always assumed that the Italians were a weak lot, made soft by years of peace. But he was about to discover that the old Roman obstinacy was alive and well. Rather than simply roll over, Aquileia chose to fight, something Maximianus had not really anticipated. Unable to break the siege, the frustrated anger of the Thracian emperor would eventually be released on his own men, and when they had taken enough of his lashings, they would return the favor by taking their own frustrated anger out on him. The siege of Aquileia would finally end not with the city sacked, but with Maximianus' head posted on a spike in front of the city gates. I say next time because I'm taking Labor Day weekend off, but we'll be back in 2 weeks for the death of Maximianus, the short and turbulent reign of the senatorial co-emperors, and the surprising emergence of young Gordian III as the sole emperor of the Roman Empire, a possibility I'm sure was not really on his radar when the year began. I'll close this week with a brief note on the History of Rome tour, which is fast becoming the History of Rome tours. The response has been fantastic to say the least, and we are working double time to schedule additional trips so that everyone who wants to go can go. I don't have any firm details just yet on when those might be, but hopefully we'll have it all in place here pretty quick. And of course, beyond this initial itinerary we've created, we've been kicking around some other ideas for future tours that I think you're going to find very, very cool. So even if this first go-around wasn't going to work for you, I want you to know that maybe we'll have something soon for you, too. This week's episode is brought to you by Audible. As you now know, Audible is the internet's leading provider of audio entertainment with over 60,000 titles to choose from. When you're done with this episode, go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome. That again, audiblepodcast.com/Rome. By going to that address, you qualify for a free book download when you sign up for a 14-day trial membership. There is no obligation to continue the service, and you can cancel anytime and keep the free book. You can also keep going with one of the monthly subscription options and get great deals on all future audiobook purchases. This week, I'm going to recommend another book by Stephen Dando Collins, The Great Fire of Rome, The Fall of Emperor Nero and His City, an account of the famous fire of 64 AD and the events that surrounded it. Just remember to go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome so that they know who sent you. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome. Episode 108, Gordian's Knot. Last week, we left the upstart senatorial regime of Pupienus and Balbinus preparing for a showdown with Maximinius Thrax and his veteran Danube legions. While Balbinus kept an eye on Rome, Pupienus had ridden north to Ravenna to lead the defense of Italy. But when the final showdown came, neither of the senatorial emperors were there to witness Maximinius' fall. Neither was 13-year-old Gordian III, who was destined to outlast them all. When they emerged from the Julian Alps into Italy, Maximinius and his legions found the Po Valley deserted. Fearing the wrath of the Thracian general, the local inhabitants had fled to the various walled cities of northern Italy, where they hoped to at least ride out the storm. Luckily for the frightened Italians, the storm didn't make it very far before dissipating. The first major city in Maximinius' path was Aquileia, and when he arrived in April 238, he demanded the Aquileians throw open the gates for their lawful sovereign. But the citizens refused, and, led by two of the senators who had been appointed in the opening days of the revolt to serve on the Emergency Defense Committee, prepared to make a stand. Enraged by this disobedience, Maximinius set siege to the city and planned to make an example of it to the rest of Italy. But Aquileia was well fortified and managed to repulse Maximinius' initial attacks. This, as you can imagine, sent the emperor into an even deeper rage. It was right around this point that the stern discipline of Maximinius, which had always been one of the main reasons his men respected him, began to become instead one of the main reasons why they hated him. He flew off the handle at the slightest provocation, issued punishments far in excess of crimes, and generally put everyone on edge. Blinded by the fury of all this defiance, Maximinius quickly drove his men from love to hate. Further degrading the morale of the troops was the paucity of supplies they were able